Welcome to the first insight of the 2025-26 season. This year we've decided to change our filming location to my house, and I'm delighted to welcome you into my study. This is where I work on the music you hear at our concerts. We begin the season with one of the most exhilarating new pieces of music I've heard recently. It's by the American composer Thompson, who was born in Atlanta in 1988 of Jamaican ancestry. To See the Sky was written in 2023, and the title comes from a line in a song, Thunderclouds, by the French-American singer Cécile McLaurin-Salvant. Sometimes you have to gaze into a well to see the sky. Joel writes, "This line asked me to examine the circumstances in which one's head could be so craned towards the ground that you would have to look into a well in order to see the reflection of the sky. It asked me to engage in an active introspection that's even greater than what I usually engage with as an artist looking inward." He subtitles the piece An Exegesis for Orchestra. An exegesis is a critical explanation of a text, and throughout the score there are expressive indications like primal scream, panic attack, hopeful yet uneasy, ascending, and free that indicate a narrative journey from captivity to freedom. Thompson segments Salvant's lyric into three parts, which give rise to the piece's three movements. The first, entitled Sometimes, alternates between music so lyrical that it seems to be setting words, and driving rhythmical motifs, which Thompson calls heavy groove, after the music of his Caribbean ancestry. Occasionally reminiscent of Bernstein's fight music in West Side Story, it's intoxicating and powerful. The second movement, You Have to Gaze into a Well, is contemplative and full of reminiscences of the first. Towards its end there's a breakthrough moment, some kind of realization full of optimism and hope. The third movement, To See the Sky, begins with the instruction, hopeful yet uneasy, in which the music gradually moves from the trepidation of the first two movements to a glorious transcendent climax in D major that seems to scream freedom from the rooftops. This is music of the utmost euphoria, soaring in triumph and unalloyed joy. It's incredibly moving, and one can't help but hear the whole piece as a narrative of the people of the African diaspora's journey in this country from slavery to freedom. I first heard the work at Vail last summer performed by the New York Philharmonic. Rarely has a piece gripped me so much on a first hearing, and I was delighted to meet the composer after the concert. He'll be writing a new piece for the Jacksonville Symphony in the coming seasons, so I hope To See the Sky acts as a welcome introduction to Joel Thompson's musical universe. Following this we move to another American masterpiece, Aaron Copland's Clarinet Concerto from 1949. At this time, the great jazz clarinetist Benny Goodman had begun to commission classical composers for concertos, following a general decline in interest in swing music. Copland was in Rio de Janeiro when Goodman requested the piece, lecturing on American music. He described the concerto as an unconscious fusion of elements related to North and South American popular music. For example, using a phrase from a then popular Brazilian tune he heard in Rio. Jazz is omnipresent in the music's rhythms and explicitly in its use of slap pizzicatos by the double basses, but the piece could only have been written by Aaron Copland. He uses a reduced orchestra of strings, harp and piano, which gives the concerto a shining transparency. It's in two movements connected by a long unaccompanied cadenza for the solo clarinet. The first movement is typical Copland. Incredibly simple but spacious and beautiful music begins in the strings and harp, while the clarinet plays a long-breathed melody full of clarity and graciousness that conjures up the Western sound of Copland's ballet, Billy the Kid. The solo cadenza is virtuosic, so much so that even the great Benny Goodman complained of its challenges. In a revised score, Copland marked the passages in question in pencil, with the comment, "Too difficult for Benny Goodman." The finale is an incredible tour de force, a combination of jazz and swing elements with angular Stravinskian neoclassicism. The piece ends with a clarinet glissando, reminiscent of the beginning of Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, as if to cement its jazz credentials. Perhaps my favourite piece of Copland, the concerto will be performed by one of the stars of the Jacksonville Symphony, Principal Clarinet Giovanni Bertoni. You won't want to miss this one. We conclude our opening classical concert with one of the great symphonies from Soviet Russia, Serge Prokofiev's Fifth. Written in 1945, only 5 years before the Copland Clarinet Concerto, Prokofiev had left the West and returned to Russia, determined to make his music central to Soviet society. He chose a universal theme, the Russian equivalent of the idea behind Copland's Fanfare for the Common Man, describing the symphony as a hymn to free and happy man, to his mighty powers, his pure and noble spirit. The timing of the premiere was coincidental but important. In January 1945, the Soviet army had won a great victory over the Germans on the Vistula River. This would turn out to be the last major battle of the war on Russian soil, so Prokofiev's music was heard as triumphant and patriotic. By March, when it was performed in Leningrad, the war had been won. The symphony quickly travelled the globe as a symbol of Russian victory, receiving its American premiere in November, conducted by Prokofiev's old friend, the Russian music director of the Boston Symphony, Sergei Koussevitzky. The symphony is in the traditional 4 movements, but with the slow movement and the scherzo swapped in order. So it's fast movement, scherzo, slow movement, finale. The first is even traditional in using sonata form, the first movement form of the classical masters. It begins with a slow introduction full of grandeur, perhaps depicting the human soul, before a stately allegro that grows to a terrific climax. The second movement, the scherzo, is fast and furious, full of the sarcastic and sardonic wit for which Prokofiev had become famous in pieces like the Scythian Suite. The third is pure ballet music, deeply reminiscent of the composer's masterpiece Romeo and Juliet. Over a gently undulating accompaniment, the violins spin a gorgeous, heart-wrenching melody that aches with longing and pathos. The finale restrikes the noble tone of the first movement, with a stately introductory hymn for the cellos divided into many parts. Then comes a good-natured and playful fast movement that seems to celebrate life and not take itself too seriously. The end of the symphony is thrilling. As if we've opened the lid of a giant clockwork machine exposing its spinning parts, the orchestra repeats a weird rhythmical pattern over which an angular melody is thundered out by the strings and trumpets. Without warning, everything is swept up in a rising scale, and the symphony ends in a massive crescendo. Today, as at its premiere, the ending almost always sweeps the audience up onto their feet, and it's my hope that you'll be part of that experience when we perform these concerts on September 26th and 27th.